Auburn family? It's your boy Mike G here with my guy C Dub, and we got a special guest for you guys today. Beat writer and podcaster for the Auburn Observer, Justin Ferguson. Justin, thanks for joining us, man.
I appreciate you guys having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, listen, Justin, we really appreciate you joining us today to talk a little bit about recruiting and money spent in recruiting. So I was hoping you'd help us clear some things up today. And I want to start with recruiting spend. Now, I follow you on Twitter, and you're definitely the numbers guy. You spill a lot of interesting numbers. So can you tell us a little bit about where Auburn is ranked in terms of recruiting spend over the last couple cycles that we actually have numbers for?
Yeah, it's really fascinating when you look at it. Auburn, 2 years ago in 2019, the 2019 numbers, they were ninth in the SEC in recruiting spending, which is kind of surprising because they were not ninth in overall finish in recruiting. Teams like Kentucky, Arkansas were spending more than them, but Auburn was still getting a pretty good return on their investment from that perspective, in that they were able to, spend 9th, 10th in the league and still get about 5th, 4th, 5th, 6th, or around those numbers in the league. And then the year before that, the numbers we have, Auburn spent a little bit more. They were kind of up to 8th in that range. But then once again, around the same that we had seen in the past from Auburn. And it's the crazy thing about recruiting in the SEC. You can recruit the number 9, number 10 class in the country, like Gus Malzahn was prone to do, but that's about 5th in the SEC a lot of years. Because of how good Alabama and Georgia, LSU and A&M have natural recruiting advantages. So you're usually battling out around where Florida is a lot of times. And so, is the recruiting spending. It's really interesting if you're looking at kind of the correlation between the money you put in and what you get out of it. Under Gus Malzahn these last couple of years, they got a pretty good return on it. But, it's because some other schools have to spend more to even, get close to maybe the halfway point, or just get higher up in the bottom half of the SEC standing, so to speak.
So, Justin, when I hear schools like Kentucky and Arkansas outspending Auburn recruiting wise, it makes me wonder what actually comprises a recruiting budget. Obviously, you have travel to go visit these kids, but what else is composed or comprised of a recruiting budget?
So the recruiting budget is really interesting because it is travel. It is going to see these kids out on the road, but it's also bringing them in. So when they go on their official visits, you get to roll out the red carpet for them. You get it all paid for, flights, get in the cars to pick them up and all that stuff. Then you bring them onto campus, and it's whatever is involved in your official visits. When your visits, all the little things that go into getting a recruiting visit, where keeping these guys, in certain spots, hotels for their families, stuff like that, food, transportation when you're out there, all the bells and whistles and all the free stuff you get when you are recruiting. You go on these visits, so there's a lot of that money that goes into that. That's what they have to report to the NCAA. This is our recruiting budget. And so what we see, which is really interesting, is like a team like Kentucky or a team like Arkansas. They're having to spend more, or they're spending more than a place like Auburn, because they're having to go a little bit farther out to go get football players. Like Arkansas, there aren't 5-star football players in Arkansas. There's only been one in like the last decade, and it was Sosa Ajim who stayed in state. They have to go all over Texas. They have to go, pretty much everywhere. I mean, when they were under Brett Bielema, they went out and got a lot of different places. So they've kind of developed more of this national reputation. They want to go into Florida. They want to get into Georgia like everybody else does. And I think you see that the same thing in Kentucky. Kentucky's got really good access to Ohio, but they bring in a lot of kids from Florida. They bring in a lot of kids from Texas. They want to go recruit those areas. So that plays into it as well. That money really starts to add up. And then it's no surprise to see a place like Alabama be so far ahead of Auburn and Georgia, because they truly recruit nationally. Like, they go out to go get Najee Harris from California. They go get Georgia got Isaiah Wilson out of Brooklyn. Like, Auburn did some of that, and they did some of that under Gus, but like, one of the big things from the Gus Malzahn era of Auburn in recruiting is they really wanted to own their recruiting territory of Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. That was where they were going to get all their work in, and it's cheaper to bring those guys in because it's not that long of a trip for them. And so I think that played a lot into it as well. And that's why you can see a team like Auburn be as low as they are, bottom half in the SEC in recruiting spending, but still, be 3, 4, 5 spots ahead of where they were, in terms of when the recruiting rankings were all said and done.
Okay, Justin. So we're painting a picture here, right? Ninth in the SEC in recruiting budget or recruiting spend.
Mm-hmm.
But they got a pretty good return on investment versus dollars spent. Now, we got a school in the same state who's outspending us. I think the last number I saw, it was almost 2.5 to 1. So for every dollar Auburn spends, they're spending $1.50 or $2.50. I think again, the last number I saw was like $2.4 million versus $900,000 that Auburn spent on recruiting. So is it safe to say that the recruiting number is dictated by the geography that they choose to cover? And should they be spending more money to go beyond the borders of Alabama, Georgia, and Florida and find those players like, the ones you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because you see this at Alabama and you see this at Georgia. And some of the things, I mean, they bring in so much money because they are such, big deals in their state. And, Alabama, the biggest, power in the sport right now. They bring in a lot of money and they turn and they invest it in their recruiting. So when a kid goes on an official visit to Alabama, it is the red carpet experience. And now at Auburn, I mean, trust me, you as someone who's covered those recruiting visits before, I mean, those guys get treated really, really well as well. But like Alabama and Georgia and these places can go over the top. And then, the national recruiting reach, I think, plays a pretty big part of it. And so it's going to be very interesting to see with Brian Harsin. Brian Harsin's introductory press conference, he was like, I'm going to go get football players from out west and tell them they need to come to Auburn. We're going to promote how good Auburn is, and we're going to take it to those places where they have those connections, those guys who coach in the Mountain West, those guys who coach, a guy like Derek Mason, from Stanford, the Pac-12. I mean, they want to bring those guys in and, take advantage of that. So I think moving forward, it will be very interesting to see if that recruiting budget goes up some, because Auburn's having a bigger reach. So these things that they have to file as recruiting spending, their coaches are having to go across the country, different places to go out and visit and go out and recruit these guys, because under Gus Malzahn, they were successful in bringing in these really good classes. But you look, most of the time, you got Alabama, Georgia, Florida. You get a little bit out of Texas, depending on who your assistant coaches were at the time. You maybe could jump into the Carolinas, Virginia, that area as well. And then you'd hit a random spot with a JUCO every now and then. It seems to me, when you look at the offers that Brian Harsin and the staff have made in anticipation for this dead period ending on June 1, is that they are going to try to make this a national brand. They are going to try to take Auburn and say, it doesn't matter where you're from, we're going to go out there and find you. And so they're doing this really good balance, I think, right now, of establishing the relationships with this new staff in these local areas, these close to home spots, because they are new faces, even though Auburn is not a new face around there. But also, they're showing that they're not going to be afraid to go offer the kid from the Pacific Northwest or out in California or out in Arizona or Colorado or something like that. And I think they've hit the Midwest and some in the Northeast as well, just because I think they're going to try to do some things that, the whole thing with Brian Harsin and Boise State, that was his whole thing, was like, do things that other people weren't doing to try to survive. Well, now he's going to do it here, and it's in order to compete against the Alabamas and the Georgias of the world. So it's going to be very fascinating to see how that develops.
Justin, with this new coaching staff, one of the things that has been introduced and something that we've seen Alabama do is they've hired an off-field staff that's dedicated to recruiting. And these guys are scouting players and what have you, and they're doing a lot of the heavy lifting for the coaching staff so that they can focus on the kids that they have here, right? And then they go out and make those pitches. When it comes to recruiting in terms of the budget, is there a certain a number of manpower that you have going out and recruiting, or are you still limited to the on-field staff that's actually meeting these kids, or are there other people involved?
Yeah, so when it comes to making visits and actually going out and on the road and talking to these kids, it is the coaches. Those are the ones that are in charge. You have your off the field people, your analysts and stuff like that, and some support staff members that can help you out when you bring them on campus. They are going to be a part of that process. But yeah, when you go out and make visits and you go out and you're like the recruiters, they are your assistants. They are your head coach and your 10 guys that you get. They have to go out there on the road. And so it's that balance that is so crazy to see how, really good college football coaches are able to take, to be really good developers of talent and to be really good recruiters. I think about the jokes that are always made when Alabama wins something. And it's like, Nick Saban's up there wanting to get back out there on recruiting. That's what he wants to do. And I think you get a lot of that, when you come into the SEC, is that you have to find that balance. You have to strike that balance. You have to bring in talent. Stars do matter, as we all know. But you also need to, what you do on the field with the guys you've got, that is going to ultimately depend on, ultimately going to determine how long you're going to be around. And so, there are a lot of people, there are a lot of recruiting coordinators and assistants, off the field stuff, people who aren't coaches that are involved in a recruiting office that get in that process. They have people who review film and kind of chop it up and get it ready for the coaches to look at, and so they can start creating their boards. They do a lot of the nuts and bolts work to make sure that you get all that stuff off your plate, so when those guys go out on the road, or when they decide here's who we're going after, when they pick up the phone and call these guys, they can just focus on just being the recruiters. And so it's interesting when you talk about recruiting spending, when that budget that comes in. One of the lines that the NCAA says that you have to do is, like, they talk about personnel involved there, right? And so, places like Alabama and Georgia and Oklahoma, Ohio State have been taught about in the past of how big these off-field staffs are for them, and where Auburn sits in that. And they're not quite as big, but it looks like they're trying to kind of go in a different direction and build it up. And the thing about the Brian Harsin, staff so far is he's got a dedicated director of recruiting. A lot of times, we saw this under Gus Malzahn. We see this a lot of places all over college football. You have one of your assistants as your kind of recruiting coordinator. This is a different way to go about it, and it's a style that some coaches use. It's what Brian Harsin was used to at Boise State, and they're bringing it in here. And I think part of the reason for that is man, try to bring in kids to Idaho. There's going to be a lot of work and a lot of manpower to get it to get all that together. And so I think they're going to bring that now to Alabama and do some of the stuff that we were talking about earlier, like, recruit truly nationwide and go a little bit farther than just Alabama, Georgia, and Florida, which they're going to continue to hit hard on. But it looks like they are going to be a little bit more diverse in where they go after. And so, yeah, there's going to be some of that's involved in it as well. And so, it's like I said earlier, the amount of spending, I wonder how much of it is going to go up under Harsin, because this is a different way of going about business, and personnel is part of it.
Okay, so it sounds like to me you think that dollars spent are going to go up a little bit, maybe not drastically, but we're going to put a little bit more effort in to have more bodies cover more ground, have more administrative people review film and help the coaches create their boards. I got to tell you, I really like the idea of having a dedicated recruiting coordinator who is somebody who is not distracted by on the field things and can help evaluate and identify talent to get that ready for the coaches to go out and make their best pitch. Now, we've been talking about recruiting spend. It's no secret Auburn is about to finish a brand new football-only facility. This thing costs tens of millions of dollars. And a lot of hubbub is being made about the effect it may have on recruiting. So on the War Rapport, we like to dispel a lot of myths. I want to talk to you about the correlation between dollars spent on things like football-only facilities and recruiting. Is there any real correlation there between having those things and recruiting rankings?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because this is something I went and kind of dug up myself when Auburn was talking about this recruiting building. And what I found is when you bring in something like, hey, we're building a football only facility, we're getting the big bells and whistles, you may get a little bump that first year, but there really is no long-term correlation. You spend that money to take care of the kids that are here. It might wow some kids when they come on recruiting visits, but when you get these football-only facilities, I mean, this is for the guys who are here. To get their best to be in the best spot they need to be to get them ready for practice, have them a place to hang out, all that good stuff that goes on in that building. And so you don't really see that much of a recruiting bump with this kind of spend. One of the fascinating things that we see is that there are some teams that have to kind of go above and beyond with their spending just to get noticed. So it kind of plays around with the correlation. I think there was a couple years ago that Kansas was one of the biggest spenders when they got Les Miles. That was one of the biggest spenders in the country for football because they were trying to get everything going, and obviously it didn't really work out for them. So there's a lot of that goes into it as well. And ultimately, the thing that the biggest correlation for recruiting, you can put all the money in there, you can put all the bells and whistles, you can get the nice facilities and all that. What brings kids on campus and what gets them there and it stays there is winning. Like, you just got to win. And that's really the only correlation we see in college football for long-term recruiting success is just, if you win, you're going to get more people and the cycle goes through. You may get every now and then you'll get an Ole Miss class that bumps up, and there was all the issues they had there with that. But like mostly you can't spend your way to a good recruiting class. And I think, for a place like Auburn, investing in these facilities, investing more in recruiting budget, like we were talking about, can only help you, but it's not going to be we do enough of this, we're definitely going to be better in recruiting. We're definitely going to be better on the field. So yeah, it is one of those funny things. I think people get really hyped up about how much recruiting is going to be helped by this football facility, and that's a pitch you'll hear from everybody, and you'll hear it from all the coaches, and you'll hear it from all the people in charge about how much it helps. Honestly, when you look at the numbers, it really just, those buildings are really, really helpful to helping keeping guys on campus and keeping them happy and keeping them ready to go.
So Justin, it sounds like we're getting a pretty decent return on our investment as it regards to the spending, because we have won some games, and it's more than what some people who've been spending more than we have. But what I want to know is, Auburn is around that 9-10 area in recruiting rankings just based off of what they've spent. Is it possible for Auburn to spend more? And will that extra amount being spent in terms of our recruiting budget, is there a way for us to increase our spending in order for us to actually rise up the recruiting rankings in terms of the recruiting cycle?
Yeah, that's the literal $1 million question, right? Like, Auburn is in a spot right now. If you look at them compared to the other Power 5 teams, they are around 15th, 20th. It's a big range where they are. I'll throw out some names for you. Teams that spent more in recruiting than Auburn did in 2019. It's the last time we had really good numbers for it. Rutgers, Minnesota, Utah, Nebraska. These are schools that aren't necessarily better off than Auburn. Now, of course, Minnesota beat Auburn in that 2019 season, so that one might be a little bit off. But we talked about Arkansas earlier. We talk about places like Kentucky. Louisville's another one. From the ACC that has spent more than Auburn. It's that reach that they're going to have to. Like, Minnesota recruits the Southeast really, really hard, and so they're having to spend more money to get those guys down there and get them up here, or up there, I should say, as well. So I think, you can always invest more. You can always do more, and maybe the recruiting budget going up for Auburn in the future might be, more bells and whistles on these official visits, truly rolling out the red carpet, given that kind of experience. Maybe it is going out and getting those guys out on the West Coast. And so if the players are higher ranked guys that they're going to, if they're casting a wider net and they are going out and getting these blue chip guys from California, the Northwest, the Northeast, all that, if that's what it's going to, if that's what's going to end up happening from it, yeah, you'll see an increase from that bigger pool. But I think, there's so much of this that's tied into geography, and there's so much of this tied into kind of overall investment. And it was one of the things that, I was saying when Gus Malzahn got fired, and while Auburn was searching for their new coach, before we knew it was Brian Harsin, it was that, okay, whatever happens next, whoever the next guy is, everybody's got to kind of be all in terms of investment, because Auburn is lagging behind some of these other schools. And so even though there's not a direct correlation in wins and losses and recruiting rankings necessarily with your spending, it can only help. Like if Auburn is, punching above their weight, so to speak, financially in certain areas, just think about what they could do if they actually if they started looking more like LSU, like Texas A&M, like even Alabama and Georgia, closer to that range in terms of their spending. If that's the case, you might be able to see even better, returns on your investment in the future. So I think, the interesting thing there is that there's no guarantee. You can spend a lot of money in recruiting and come up empty. Just ask Kansas. But what you have to do if you're in this situation, I think if you're Auburn is, if you're going to be committed to this wider net, if you're going to be committed to this new way of, approaching the recruiting staff and all that, be willing to spend, be willing to put the investment in. And so it's going to be very fascinating to see how much of that comes through. Because not only is this a new staff, you got to keep in mind, they paid a lot of money to get rid of the last staff and then bring this new one in. And you're also coming off of COVID. So financially, it's going to be a fascinating stretch here for Auburn athletics. And so it's going to be weird whenever we get the next financial reports, I think for sure.
Justin, in your opinion, how important is it to be in good standing with the athletic director? This is Alan Green's first big hire. So I would assume that his first hire he will give his first hire in Brian Harsin everything he needs in order to be successful so that the AD can be successful. Is there a good reason to assume that Harsin won't have a hard time being able to expand the recruiting territory for Auburn, seeing as though he's the first big guy of Alan Green?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And the thing there is that, Alan Green, not only is it his first guy, his first big hire, but if you go with the reporting of how this search went, he stuck his neck out for this dude. Like he stood up to some very powerful people and said, we're going to do it this way. I'm the athletic director. We're going to do our due diligence here. And they ended up landing with Brian Harsin off of that. So I think that's important. Like athletic director wise, administrative wise, Alan Green has been a guy, when he first came in, he tightened up the budgets at Auburn. He cut down some spending there that some people kind of took it by surprise. He's a money guy. He comes through the world of development. That's what he did at Notre Dame. That's what he did at Ole Miss before he got his shot at Buffalo. And so he's a fundraiser. And if you've ever talked to him and met him, he's a very charismatic guy, and he's very good. He's very good with people, and you can see how people can buy into him. So I think from an administrative side, he's going to want to do everything it takes to make sure Auburn athletics is successful, and football being the main driver of that is going to be big for him. But I think it's also going to be, like I said earlier, this has got to be investment from the people who give the money, right? Like, we can talk about fans, average fan who might be listening to this. You can buy tickets, you can support financially, but like, where the real separation comes in college sports is where the big money comes in. And these people who are donors is like, they got to get on board with it. And I'm sure not everybody was happy with the Brian Harsin hire, but like, if you want Auburn to truly be the best it can be, everybody's got to get on board and everybody's got to invest. And so it's things like this football facility. I mean, think about how long it took for them to just get this thing going. Right. It's things like renovating stuff at Jordan-Hare. It's things, to facilities wise and stuff like that. Auburn's got a long way to go to catch up with some of the best in the SEC. And so everybody's got to be on board with that. Everybody's got to be invested in that. And that's where power and ego and a lot of that stuff comes in with college athletics. And so this is why I think this first year under Brian Harsin is going to be a really interesting one to watch on the field, because this is one, even though nobody really expects Auburn to be fantastic this upcoming season, a championship contender, it's going to be a year where you can get a lot of people to buy in, whether it's the average fan or the people who are going to be making the money moves for him later on down the line. So I think from the administrative perspective, Alan Green and Auburn is going to give Brian Harsin and his staff what it needs to succeed. But it's going to come up to the fan base and especially the big money people of the fan base to make sure everybody's on board and give these guys what they need to succeed, because that's what makes it in college football. You look at Alabama, look at Georgia. How much did Nick Saban change everything that Alabama did? Same thing at Georgia with Kirby Smart. They changed everything about the way their athletic athletic department was run and handled money-wise, when they came in. And so I think that's one of the big things for Auburn moving forward is just everybody's got to get on the same page. Everybody's got to buy in and, give this staff what it takes to succeed, because there's going to be a learning curve because you're coming from somewhere you've never been before with a guy like Brian Harsin.
Justin, help me out here, because Caesar is saying, what kind of investment is Alan Green going to make in his first big hire? And I'm asking, who's actually holding the purse strings? So you mentioned something that was interesting, right? At the end of the day, it comes down to winning. Put a good product on the field, recruiting will go up. And my question is twofold. Who's holding the purse strings, right? And what does Harsin have to show on the field to get the people holding the purse strings to loosen them, right? So, Harsin can go, let's say he goes 8-4 in his first year, which is pretty much what Gus did. Is that enough in what is a little bit of a rebuild for the people holding the purse strings to say, if we give this guy more resources, he can do more, right? And then who is that? Is Alan Green going to the president of the university and saying, I need more money? Is he going to the board of trustees? Where's that money coming from?
Yeah, that money's coming from boosters. That money is coming from the people who, if you ever go to Auburn Arena, you see their names on the wall when you walk in. They are on the scoreboard during a quarter break or a TV timeout saying, hey, these are the people who have given X amount of money to Auburn athletics. Thank you. Like, those are the people who really hold all the power in the situation, because they are the movers and shakers. You have to donate, those $1 million facilities, those mega $1 million facilities in college athletics. You don't turn a profit. It's part of the design to make sure you don't turn a profit. One of the things that you do is that even though you're not paying kids salaries or anything like that, coaching salaries go up, facilities go up. You do all these. You have to, if you're football or basketball, you have to pay for pretty much every other athletics team on campus, because at the end of the day, they don't want to turn a profit, because that's not what they don't want to make it look like that, right? And so when you talk about how much this money comes in, you need donors. You need the big money people to step up. And so there's a lot of people like that. And there's a lot of people that get involved there with that. Now, I think just giving's got to go up. Support's got to go up. People got to buy tickets. I think one of the big things is, getting a full stadium back. Hopefully, fingers crossed, everything goes well with COVID and all that. And we get a full on season in college football. That's going to make a big difference as well. People are going to be spending money again when finances kind of start bouncing back up. So you got that in mind. And when you ask about what would be good enough, one of the things I've been trying to say this offseason is I don't know if there's necessarily a magic number that Brian Harsin has to hit. Like, we can look at the schedule and see, okay, maybe you should beat this team or this team. But so much changes on the fly in college football that I think it's a little hard to project. And then Auburn, as y'all well know, is the toughest team in college football to predict year in and year out. You can't really know what's coming from them. I think the big thing Brian Harsin's got to sell for Auburn football moving forward, and talking to people who have been kind of around the program closely here since he's been on campus, it's got to be, you're building a new culture, you're building a new identity. I think a lot of people want to compare Brian Harsin and what he's bringing in to kind of like what Auburn had with Pat Dye in the 80s. It's just, we're going to do this thing completely different. This is our new mentality. This is that hard work, hard nose, a mentality like that. And I think people need to see that on the field. So it might not necessarily be X amount of wins. I do think the one thing I think Auburn fans are going to want to see more than anything, especially with the way the Gus Malzahn tenure ended, is is this new look offense? Do you have signs of life? Like some of my friends call it, they do another podcast, proof of concept. When you put it out there on the field by the end of the year, you're saying, okay, well, this can be built. This can be added on to. We can see where this is going. Because the thing with the Gus Malzahn era, there's two main things, right? Gus Malzahn, we talked about it earlier, recruiting, spending, all that, kind of about where he finished in the SEC. But the two main things is that he was an offensive coach and his offense was going backwards. And secondly, he wasn't doing well enough against Georgia. And then every other year you go down to LSU and lose automatically. So your rival, you could be the best coach in America at playing Nick Saban, and still those things really, really held a lot of weight. So I think what Brian Harson's got to do is he's got to establish that proof of concept. He's got to show this is what Auburn football looks like now. This is what we're going to do moving forward. And that you can see, okay, when I get more time and I get more resources and I get my recruiting classes in and we continue to develop them on this path, you can see year 2, year 3, beyond, this team can compete for championships. Because I go back to everything we heard from Alan Green and Brian Harsin when he got hired, when Brian Harsin got hired, is the phrase that they kept repeating. Him, Jay Gouge, everybody in those statements said, consistently compete for championships. Auburn competed for some championships under Gus Malzahn. Consistency is what they're looking for. And so I think what they've got to build now is like, we're going to be consistent, right? We might not be, I don't think the Brian Harsin era is going to be flashy. Like, you're not going to have like that 2013 out of nowhere offensive explosion like we saw for Gus Malzahn. But what I think you are going to try to see, if it all works out, is that this is going to be a team that when you put them out there on the field every Saturday, they're going to have a chance because they're going to be schemed up well. They're going to play consistent football, and you're going to know what to expect from them. And it's going to be a product that Auburn fans are going to be proud of instead of going roller coaster up and down all the time about what's going on. So I think that's what they got to do. I think that is going to be the big thing. Maybe not just a wins and losses thing, but like when you put it out there on the field this year, are Auburn fans going to be able to look and say, all right, we need to invest in this guy because he's got a vision, he's got a plan, and this is what, I'm buying into the culture he's trying to build.
All right, Justin, we're getting into talking about coaching salaries. We already hear from you, and we got an idea that Harsin has to kind of show a proof of concept that he's installing his culture and that Auburn appears to be heading in a new direction that looks encouraging for the fan base. Harsin is currently making a little bit over $5 million a year, or right at $5 million a year, which puts him almost, I don't know, there's that middle of the conference, you would say. Coaches who are making that amount of money, what typically is their average win-loss record?
Yeah, so Brian Harsin's new contract at Auburn is going to pay him $5.25 million annually. This first year is going to be $5 million. If you look at it in SEC terms, last season, Mike Leach was making $5 million his first year at Mississippi State. Kentucky, just a little over $5 million for Mark Stoops. Michigan State had $5.2 million for Mel Tucker, I'm sorry, $5.1 million. 5.2 went to Northwestern's Pat Fitzgerald. So at that range, you're talking about a team that is probably, State fell off and Kentucky fell off as well, and Michigan State's very much in a rebuilding effort right now. But you look at Northwestern, you look at some of those teams around that area, you're looking with an SEC schedule, 7-8 wins around that neighborhood, which I think is a pretty fair thing to go for year one for Brian Harsin. You are kind of trying to establish some things out. The funny thing is that the salaries just skyrocket from there. Ryan Day makes close to $6 million. I don't know what Sark's salary is at Texas, but that was around where Tom Herman was last year. And so when you get up to $6 million, you start getting into the range of the, that's where Gus was, but also you got, Kirby, Jimbo Fisher, Jim Harbaugh, those the big names in the sport. So right here is that kind of middle tier. You've got programs that are spending big because of where they are in the world, and then you've got some that are kind of some up and coming coaches or guys are kind of on the early parts of their contract. So yeah, you're looking about a 7-8 win in that range, and some of them throw it off. Like TCU's paying Gary Patterson over $6 million a year, but he's been there forever, and so there's always different ones like that. I'm sure Florida's going to start paying Dan Mullen more, on top of that. So I think that's kind of where you're going to be in the range. When we talked about Gus Malzahn making $7 million a year, by the end of his time at Auburn, he was 7th in the country. That was also 5th in the SEC. So, at this point now, about in the middle of the pack of the conference. I would think that the way contracts are usually set up, you're looking at Bama, LSU, Georgia, A&M, Florida, and possibly even Kentucky and Mississippi State being ahead of Harsin where he is in year one. And so mid-tier, that's kind of what you're paying for right now. And we all know that if Brian Harsin is really, really successful, he'll be making more than that down the line. But the way this contract's kind of set up is you're kind of in that range of where your mid-tier your mid-tier coaches are in the Power 5 level at this point in college football.
So you said something that's really interesting to me. Our last coach finished 7th in the country in total salary, but was 5th in the conference, which to me highlights how uber competitive it is in the SEC when you're talking about trying to compete, because everybody's spending top dollar to get a coach who can come in and produce, right? You produce on the field. We talked about earlier that production leads to more resources, which should lead to better recruiting, which should lead to more winning, right? So in your estimation, Justin, in these we've got all these links on the chain. Would you say that in year one, I know you said that it may not necessarily be win-loss record in year one, but we are asking for proof of life before we pay the ransom in terms of this offense. Somebody kidnapped our offense, and before we pay the ransom to get it back, we need proof of life. Is it alive? Can you tell me, in your estimation, does all these resources that we hope that they turn loose to help them be successful hinge on how successful we are offensively in 2021? It seems like not a lot of people have questions about the defense. So we did take a step back defensively last year, but I think for most fans, it's just been we had an offensive head coach, and our offense was disappointing. And progress moving forward will be about what do we look like offensively, and what is our identity? Do you think that is the thing that people are going to be subconsciously, even maybe that people are going to be looking at to determine what kind of progress we're making?
Oh, 100%. Because not only are you coming off of an offensive head coach and your offense was regressing, offense is the lifeblood of football. Like there are, I think it was 2 years ago, I think it was the 19 season. If you looked at yards per play in college football, all 4 of the playoff teams were in the top 5. You look at the top 5 defenses in yards per play that year. One of them was Iowa, and the other one was Mississippi State. And this might have been an 18, and they were playing in the Outback Bowl, right? So offense rules the day. We can all say you have a great defense, but offense is ultimately what's going to separate you from what you have in college football. It's that championship quality that you have to have. And so, yeah, I think that's going to be the case. The Brian Harsin offense, the Mike Bobo offense isn't going to be this just wide open, point a minute type of offense, but you're going to want to see consistency. You're going to want to see, less really bad lulls in games, where you go play a rival and you don't really have anything going on the offensive end. So, yeah, I think ultimately it's it. And so that's what makes the Harsin hire and Mike Bobo and all that so interesting, where so many places in college football are like Nick Saban, where they're going faster, spread out, embracing this modern offense, which he rejected for so long. Auburn's kind of going to more of this pro-style system, and it's a gamble, but it's going to be what, if it ends up paying off, this is what we're going to see as kind of the future of what Auburn football is going to look like. So, yeah, it's absolutely going to be on offense, because you can have an amazing defense, but offense is what's going to get you over the line. In football, you see it in the NFL now as well. But you definitely see it in college football. Elite defenses really, really help you out, and it's playoff teams that have them usually go pretty far. But if you would rather have a really good offense or a really good defense, 100 times out of 100, you better be picking offense in this day and age of college football. So yeah, absolutely, I think that's what people are going to have in their minds as what success is going to look like, because of the downturn that's happened offensively really since the 17 season.
Well, listen, Justin, we really appreciate you joining Caesar and I today to talk numbers and recruiting and really break down for us what comprises a recruiting budget, how dollars are spent and how that dollar spent correlates to winning. So thank you for bringing those numbers and that insight today. We appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime you guys want to have me on, this was a blast. Thank y'all.
Well, as always, we are the War Rapport. Please hit like and subscribe. We are the War Rapport on YouTube, the War Rapport on Twitter and Instagram, TW Rapport on TikTok. Gentlemen, we're signing off, and as always, War Eagle.